If you're an aspiring doctor, the MCAT is a big deal. So few things could be worse than getting halfway through your MCAT prep and realizing that you've been making a pretty big mistake the whole time, whether it's wasting time through inefficient studying or not getting enough skills practice, or even getting all the way to the MCAT, but being so nervous that you make stupid mistakes, which could put your score at risk. Well, first of all, chill. You do have this. You got this. You just need a little bit of advice. So what we're going to do today is plant some nice big red flags in the biggest MCAT mistakes other students have made so that you can see them from a mile off and avoid them. And here to help me do just that is Dr. Kevin Jubbal, the founder of Med School Insiders, which is a medical school and residency admissions consulting firm that helps students make smooth transitions from medical education to practice. Well, he also scored in the 99.9th percentile on the MCAT. So yeah, it's safe to say that he knows exactly how to navigate the turbulent waters of MCAT prep. So with that said, here's Dr. Kevin Jubbal and the common MCAT mistakes you need to avoid. Okay, Dr. Jubbal, what in your opinion is the cardinal error students make when preparing for the MCATs, the sort of one mistake you would want them to avoid above all others?
Great question. I think the biggest thing that I see most commonly is not using active learning strategies. I think most students are still in the very old mindset of like, oh, let me just read this textbook or watch some lectures or watch some videos. And those are all very passive. And you can improve your score, but you're not going to improve your score nearly as much or as quickly compared to if you were to use active learning methods, which are a little bit more challenging at first. I remember when I first started using active learning methods, it felt like work. It was more difficult, more energy, more uncomfortable at times, but you learn much faster, and then your results on the MCAT test day are also much better.
Yeah, can you give us a couple of examples of techniques you used?
Yeah, so a couple of my favorites would be, flashcards, for example, active recall with spaced repetition more specifically, which is best used with flashcards. Another one would be practice problems and practice tests. And then if you want to do group studying, which I did from time to time, sometimes solo studying, sometimes studying with one or two friends. I don't recommend more than two friends because usually things get more distracting at that point. But you can do the Feynman technique, which is essentially if you come across something that is complex, that is confusing, and it's not just simple rote memorization, then I find it pretty helpful to actually explain that concept to your friends, to your colleagues, and they can try explaining it back to you as well. But that really solidifies the comprehension and the understanding rather than just the incomplete memorization of a few isolated facts.
Right. It would be very helpful if at the point you started taking exams in your academic career that they would teach you how to study, but it is just something we've always as students figured out for ourselves or what works for us. But as you said, a lot of people go into, their postgraduate studies, not really knowing how to study efficiently. So
yeah, I didn't actually know until med school, because even in college, it was like brute force. It was like passive study strategies, but just like a lot of it, brute force. Yeah. And that again, it can work, but it's not going to be as nearly as efficient or effective.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about here, efficient study. So one mistake I've heard quite a bit about is prioritizing content knowledge over skills practice. So, when in fact the MCAT heavily assesses and rewards critical analysis and reasoning skills. So how should students be structuring their prep to avoid this mistake?
Great question. I actually think it's really important to highlight that, because a lot of people think the MCAT is a lot of content to know, and it is a good amount of content to know. But I actually believe compared to USMLE, which is the board exam that medical students take, there's actually more critical thinking involved with the MCAT compared to USMLE. There's a lot more content for USMLE, and there is some critical thinking, but MCAT is less content, comparatively speaking, but more critical thinking. So the two main things are, number one, comprehension, because if you don't fully understand the information, you're not going to be able to critically think through it. So that's the first thing, not just isolating facts or not memorizing facts in isolation, but really understanding it. And then number two is actually using practice questions and practice tests.
Yeah.
And most students, they will save it for the end. Like, oh, the last 4 weeks, that's when I'm going to start using my practice questions and practice tests. But in doing that, I understand the theory being that if you first focus on content review in the first 1 to 2 months and then practice questions, practice tests in the last month, then you're getting the content and then you're applying the content. But we found that's not nearly as effective as if you start using those practice questions from the beginning. And you can increase the frequency of your full-length practice exams, for example, as you get closer to test day. But using these questions will help you learn to think critically. It'll help you learn how to apply the knowledge. It'll help you with timing. It'll help with various skills that translate better to test day. It also actually teaches you content.
Yes.
So it's an active learning method.
Yeah, that's totally true. Yeah, it's one of our biggest pieces of advice for people preparing for these big exams is to take one right at the beginning of your prep. You know, it teaches you what you're studying for. What are you preparing for? You know, as opposed to just trying to learn the content. Another mistake that seems to be quite prevalent is students not taking enough time to work through their practice exams. And we've sort of touched on this. Oftentimes the focus is on what was the right answer as opposed to why was it the right answer? And also why were the other multiple choice options wrong? So how should students take practice exams to get the most value out of them?
A lot of people focus on just taking the practice exam and not so much on the reviewing. So I think reviewing should take just as long, sometimes even longer than taking the real test, or taking the real practice test rather. So what I recommend is every single question that was wrong and every single question that was marked. So, you know, students often mark like they're unsure, they want to come back. Those all need to be reviewed really thoroughly. The whole explanation, really like understand every single concept. Questions that you got right, people like to just skip. However, there are many times when you do miss something. You got lucky, you guessed, you misunderstood something and it just worked out in your favor. For every correct answer, I still recommend going through it. However, if after like, you know, a few seconds of reviewing the explanation or going through things, you say, okay, hey, I know this, then you can move on, because it's all about, you don't want to waste time going over things you already know, but there is a very high probability that there are several questions on the test you got right that you don't actually know everything from that question. So going through every question, but prioritizing those that you got wrong or that you marked.
Yeah. And another thing we say is if you learn something new while doing it, create a flashcard for it or create a note so that you can
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So people can either create flashcards, or another thing I've seen is creating like a document of like your lessons learned from your practice tests. Because so the trick is like, you don't want it to be too verbose and too extensive, because then you have this massive document that you're never going to go through. But if you just have a few things on each test, like the really key points, then it's pretty manageable, and then you can review that every couple weeks, and that'll stick a lot better. What about treating a practice exam like it's the real thing and doing it in one sitting? Oh, 100%. Yeah, that should be the default. You should be doing the practice test as close as possible to the real thing, which not only includes doing it in one sitting, but also treat the breaks like the real breaks. Only take as much break time as you have for the real test. Do it at the same time of day. So if you're going to take your MCAT at 8 a.m., then start your test at 8 a.m., for example, because you need to get used to being sharp at that time. And similarly, if you're taking it at like 3 p.m. or you're doing the afternoon time, you want to get used to that, because usually, I mean, I know for myself, I would get really tired if I was still working through a test at 6 or 7 p.m. And then the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that when you're at the testing center, there is more time, like to start and end your break, you need to check in and check out. So what I like to do is even add a little bit of that buffer time. So I need to be sitting at my desk in my home before the timer is up, because in the real test, it'll take me 2 minutes to give them my ID and empty my pockets and for them to, like, you know, scan the metal detector, all those things. Yeah. Okay, great. So what other mistakes do you see students making when it comes to studying or preparing for the MCAT? There's a lot. So I think a common one is, so like FOMO is a big one. People hear other students using X, Y, or Z resources, and then they think that they need to be using those resources because they're afraid of missing out on some content or some value there. But if you spread yourself too thin, you're not able to get through each piece of content maximally, and then you end up leaving points on the table. So it's better to have a plan, have a strategy up front before you dive in for your MCAT. So 2, 3, 6 months, however long you want to study, plan it out and then stick to that plan. You'll fall behind here and there. That's normal. You shouldn't fall behind too much, but you can dial things and tweak them, but you shouldn't kind of scrap things, be like, oh my God, I'm not getting the score I want. One of the recent students I was mentoring was getting a bit concerned that he wasn't hitting. He has very high score aspirations, so he's trying to get like 518 to 520, maybe even low 520s. And I think like 6 weeks out, he was still hitting 508, 510, things like that on his practice tests. but you have to trust the process and simply, if you put in the time, you're studying correctly, you're doing everything according to plan, you're putting in the time, and you're resting, you're sleeping, you're doing all the things right, it will work out. You just need to give it time. Don't stress. Don't change your test date at the last minute. Don't delay it further, because you'll probably burn out. Your score is not going to be any higher. I think there's a lot of value in finding someone who you trust to, mentor you or help you with your MCAT study strategy and your plan. Because oftentimes we self-sabotage.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now let's move on to the kind of mistakes students make on the day of the exam. Where are students most often going wrong here?
Okay, on the test day. It's a good question. Well, there's a lot of things with actually the test. Like a lot of people get stressed. Yeah. And they have test taking anxiety. And if you are approaching the test kind of flustered, you're going to make silly mistakes. You're going to miss a keyword of accept. You're going to miss, you're going to read the questions wrong. You're going to make silly mistakes where you actually know the content. Those are incredibly frustrating. But I think beyond that, it's a lot of like the simple, not sexy stuff that people don't focus on enough. So things like, did you get enough sleep the night before? Were you being regular with your sleep for the several nights before your test day? So if you are used to sleeping at 2 a.m. and waking up at 10 a.m. most days, and then on your test day, you need to wake up at 6 a.m. and sleep at 10 p.m., you're not gonna be able to fall asleep. So you need to be dialed in with your circadian rhythm for several days before your actual MCAT, for example. You wanna have your nutrition dialed in. You wanna have all the little small things about keeping your mental performance at its maximum is gonna be more important than like, oh, let me like review these equations before the test date in the morning. That's just going to stress you out, because you're going to feel like, oh my God, I forgot this. And then you're getting psyched out. You want to focus on the simple core foundations.
Right. Get your body right, because it's your tool that you're using. And to sit through, I mean, what is it, an 8-hour exam? 6 hours? How long is the MCAT?
Yeah, with breaks, I think it's like 6 hours of testing, I believe, plus the breaks brings it to like 7 roughly, something like that.
It's a total marathon. So you've got to go into it strong and well rested and well hydrated and well nourished. Yeah. All right. So are there any other common MCAT mistakes you'd like to draw attention to? Perhaps those outside the realm of study? I mean, we kind of touched on the whole lifestyle choices that you're making.
Well, one thing that I think that a lot of students, kind of going back to the test taking anxiety, you have two ways of interpreting that. So there's like this physiologic response that happens to stress, and you're going to have your heart rate, you're going to feel your heart rate elevates, you're going to maybe sweat a little bit, you're going to feel a little bit anxious. But that physiologic response is essentially identical. Like what's happening in your body is identical, whether you're excited or afraid. But the actual self-talk you have is going to really dictate how you end up performing on the test. Yeah. So I would get that. I always got that. But the self-talk I adopted when I took my MCAT or when I took other standardized tests, what I found interesting was that on my practice tests, I would score around here, and I'd always score a few points higher on any real test, whether that's USMLE, MCAT, SAT, all the tests, because I recalibrated that physiological response into like, all right, cool, it's showtime. I'm excited. Let's do this. It was a game. It became more of like competition in the enjoyable, fun sense of the word. And I know it sounds crazy because a lot of students are probably rolling their eyes right now, but you can actually find enjoyment in test taking. It can be like a sport in a way. A lot of students, on the other hand, they allow that anxiety and they're like, oh my God, there's so much pressure. If I don't do well, I'm not going to get into med school. If your mind goes there, you're going to start spiraling down, and that's not going to serve you. So when you do feel that stress, you just have to ask yourself, what is going to serve me? And you choose the self-talk that does that.
It's incredible that physiological response is the same, and that you can just rewire it to be a force for good, for positive, as opposed to derailing your focus or concentration in the exam. That's so
another one, like, public speaking is a very common, it's like the most common fear, right? So same thing there. I remember I hated public speaking. And then there was this one talk I gave where like there was a lot of pressure because it was about my first company and I was trying to get funding. And when I just reframed it as like, you know what, I'm going to channel my inner my inner like Steve Jobs on this talk, and just like be really passionate and like, I'm excited about this, this thing that I built, then that's actually when the switch flipped and I started enjoying public speaking. So the same strategy can be used with test taking.
Yeah, well, a little personal anecdote. The first time I ever did one of these interviews, I was bricking it. Like I was so nervous. I've never been on TV or YouTube or anything. So I was really nervous. But as soon as I finished the interview, I was just like alive with excitement. And it was amazing how that shift was from nervous energy to excited energy. So now it's what you're saying, really, like I'm getting it now. Like, my physiological state was in that like excited nervousness, but it was I'm going to screw this up versus having done a good job after the fact was, I saw that flip. So yeah. Really great advice. I like that one.
Beautiful.
Cool. So best advice for coping with exam anxiety. Aside from this obviously great point that you discussed.
I think that's the main thing I would say. I think another thing is getting the reps in and practicing the test like the real thing. So on the real test, you're going to probably use earplugs because there's going to be a lot of people in the room with you. There's going to be sounds, there's going to be distracting. So having everything as close as possible to the real test, including wearing earplugs, even though you're at home and it's quiet, wear your earplugs because some people find it uncomfortable, but get used to it. You can even, let's see, what else?
I got a quick one I can just chuck in here, is to actually drive to the testing center at the time you're meant to be there, on the day you're meant to be there, so that you know exactly where you're meant to be at the time you're meant to be. I once got lost on the way to a test and I'll never forgive myself for it. But yeah, so just figure out your
That's a great point.
Yeah,
I did that as well. I usually did it the day before the test because the day before the test, I did not want to study as hard, just relax and kind of focus on my mindset.
Yeah.
So I would drive, that's a great point. I would drive before the test because you want to reduce all the different unknowns that can throw you off, including like, oh my God, I'm flustered now because I took the wrong turn. I don't know where to park, all these things. Great point.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so finally, please tell me how Med School Insiders help students take the shortest, most pain-free route to and through the MCAT and onwards to medical school.
So Med School Insiders, we're all about helping students that want to become doctors. And when it comes to the MCAT, we understand how stressful it is. We have a YouTube channel called Med School Insiders that we provide a lot of free study advice, study tools, MCAT schedules. Like we provide a lot of content there for free because it's more than just the traditional, like, here's the content, do this practice test, follow the schedule. It's about like, are you also sleeping right? Do you have the right test taking strategies? Do you have the right frame when you do get test anxiety? Things like that will translate to higher test scores. Because we think that like personal and professional life are siloed apart. They're these different things. They're really deeply intertwined. So that's the YouTube channel. And then for students that do want one-on-one tutoring, we do offer that on our website. All of our tutors have scored 95th percentile or higher. Many of them actually scoring in the 99th percentile. They're fantastic tutors. It's not just about high scores, it's about being a great tutor. Yeah. And then we also we partnered with MEM, which is another company that I'm involved with. And we've integrated it's essentially like a flashcard app with the tutoring and it works together.
Awesome. Okay, well, Dr. Jubbal, thank you so much for chatting to me today. We've got some great advice here for MCAT takers. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So there you have it. The red flags have been planted for all to see, and now you can go about avoiding them like you avoid people with bad oral hygiene and persistent dry coughs. And if you'd like a helping hand to guide you through these hugely important steps in your medical career, get in touch with Med School Insiders, details provided below. If you are preparing to take on the MCAT, make sure you get Brainscape certified MCAT flashcards in your corner. We have distilled down and organized the science content you need to know into an awesome collection of smart flashcards, which are proven to help you learn and remember content twice as fast as traditional study methods. Armed with these, you'll keep up that healthy cadence of daily review that is so essential for landing high scores on the MCAT. And for even more guidance, check out the other videos we have on Brainscape's medical channel, including more interviews like this one. And go to our MCAT Academy for free study guides on everything you need to know to prepare for and ace the MCAT. These tools, together with your ambition and hard work, is everything you need to rise to your challenge.